This podcast is a proud member of the Unidentified Network.
On the Track is a monthly web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
So what have we got exciting that's coming up in this episode, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, in this week's episode we are looking at introductionists, and in particular the people who have unofficially reintroduced one of Britain's most beautiful and rare carnivores to places from which they were extirpated over a century ago.
I really like the old credits.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, my name's John Downs and welcome to another episode of... Goodness me, is that a talking mongoose there before my eyes?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I am Jeff the Talking Mongoose, and this week's show is going live from the Victorian Ant Centre in Halifax, Yorkshire. There you can see the Baker Street leaf cutters, the Formica peelers, and Conan Doyle's Performing Ants.
Yes, of course it is. Start again. My name is John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and welcome to another episode, whatever it is, of On the Track. Every Wednesday evening at 6:30 for about a quarter of an hour, and every Saturday afternoon at 3 for about twice that, we bring you a miscellany, a mishmash, a montage, I'm running out of things that begin with M. Hey, Lauren, what begins with M?
Marzipan, of course.
Yeah, I can work with that. Thank you, Lauren. Yes, we bring you a marzipan, apparently, of hard science, weird shit, and surreality. And what surreality, you may ask? Better ask him, I suppose.
Surreality just is, in the way that my head isn't.
And now, let's get on with it. Something very interesting happened recently, and Richard Freeman was here with me up at the CFZ to be able to discuss it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have had some very interesting news here at CFZ Towers. Most of you will probably know that, golly, well over 25 years ago, I wrote a book called The Smaller Mystery Carnivores of the West Country, and in that book I took issue with a paper by Langley and Yaldon from 1977 in which they claimed that the rarest British mammals, by which they meant the wildcat, the pine marten and the polecat, had all been hunted to extinction in Britain by the end of the 19th century. I've got to rephrase that. All been hunted to extinction in England by the end of the 19th century. I had evidence that Pine Martens at least had survived considerably longer, up until at least the 1970s. And so I decided to look into the rest of their claims, and yes, boys and girls, I found them wanting. I took my evidence to the Mammal Society, who were completely abusive about it, and basically implied that because I had long hair and was driving a bright pink transit van at the time, I couldn't be taken seriously as a zoologist. But I published the book anyway, and over the following 25 plus years, a lot of my claims have proven to be correct, especially about pine martens. Now, pine martens have been found now to be alive and well and living in various counties in southern England. But one of the great misfortunes with it all, they haven't been found to be living in the parts of southern England that I said that they'd be found in. Until very recently. A few years ago, we had a report of a dead pine marten found on the fringes of Dartmoor. Now, that was a very peculiar case because it turned out that it had been microchipped and had been captured somewhere in Wales and then brought here. I tried to get hold of the body and was told in no uncertain terms by the man who found the body that he'd been told that he had to give the body back to the people responsible for the translocation. He said it was an official translocation, so I spoke to both the Devon Wildlife Trust and the Vincent Wildlife Trust. And the Vincent Wildlife Trust are the one organisation in Britain who are allegedly in charge of the Pine Marten reintroduction projects, and both of them denied that there was any attempt to reintroduce the species to Devon, not at the time anyway. And this was, Karina was still alive, so it was probably 7-8 years ago. Then, the other day, I received a video from our old friend Susie Marsh. Now, this is a still from the video, because although Susie got permission from the person who took the video for us to use it, I was stupid enough to leave it up on Facebook, and guess what, boys and girls? It's disappeared. So the only evidence for this is the one still, but it is still a completely, obviously and irrefutably a pine marten. So I asked Susie to be my investigator in charge, to be my lady detective. She's far too young and pretty to be Miss Marple, but I asked her to don the garb of the lady detective and find out some stuff for me. So she had a word with a lot of people in the area, including the gamekeeper at the nearby Clovelly estates, and they all told her that pine marten had been seen quite regularly for several years. Whether it was the same specimen or whether it was multiple specimens, we don't know. The gamekeeper was convinced that they were not original animals. They were the results of a illegal introduction by the people who call themselves Introductionists, and we're going to be talking more about them later. Amongst the other hats I wear in life, and I don't mean this one, I am the editor of the parish magazine for this village and 2 other villages adjacent to us. And so, after receiving the film from Susie Marsh, I asked in an editorial, could anybody out there in readership land tell me any more about these sightings? And I received a letter from a lady called Kay. I'm not going to identify her further. It's not my stepsister Kay, by the way, just in case you were thinking. And she said that about 20 years ago there were a series of sightings by a friend of hers of a pine marten in the woods above Bucks Cross and Bucks Mills. Now those woods are interesting from a cryptozoological point of view because although red squirrels became extinct in England, mainland England anyway, in about 1964, okay, there was a small relic population in Thetford Forest in Norfolk, but they've since died out, even though we're sending an investigatory team in there with camera traps to see if we can get any evidence that they are still existing. But that's another story, and I'm digressing, which I have a tendency to do, and I'm trying not to in this case. Kay, who shall remain nameless, said that there had been a whole string of these sightings 20 years ago. I put out a further appeal, and believing that it is most likely that this introduction is the work of introductionists, I asked the person responsible if they could come and talk to me completely and utterly in confidence, and I promised I wouldn't identify them because I wanted to know more about who they were and how they did it. Since then, I have also received reports and photographs showing that pine martens have been photographed on the edges of Exmoor by Marten in North Devon. So it looks as if, for some reason or other, and I'm afraid I think they are still probably the work of introductionists rather than the original indigenous population, although the last known indigenous specimen of the pine marten was shot near Marten in, I think, 1904, and it's in Marten Museum where we photographed it. Pine martens are back in North Devon, and now English Nature and various other people involved, including the Vincent Wildlife Trust, have openly said that they are planning to reintroduce the species to Dartmoor, which I think is jolly good news. But today I've got Richard Freeman in the studio with me. I think that introductionists are jolly good people. I'm still enough of an anarchist to believe that anything which circumvents the slow and laborious and expensive process that the British government puts in place for any reintroduction programs to take place is actually a very good thing. But Richard, let's talk about introductionists. What do you think about illegal and unauthorised reintroduction programs?
As long as they're being done by people who know what they're doing and not any old Tom, Dick and Harry, then I think it's great, because if you waited for the government to do it, it would never happen. Britain is so timid and so cowardly and so cowed by its farmers that we're miles behind other European countries in bringing back animals that were once lived here and were now extinct. All over the place in Europe they're bringing back the brown bear, the lynx, the wolf and other animals. Now we have the wild boar back completely by accident from escapes, and now they've established themselves. We had the eagle owl return in small numbers, but it's definitely here. And we've had an official return of the beaver. So I think it's time to bring back the brown bear, the wolf, the lynx, the wolverine, the European moose, the European bison and these other animals. And we can do this in the Highlands of Scotland, the north of England, anywhere where there's sufficient room for them and sufficient forests. And you've got to remember that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of square miles of Britain are given over to raising pheasants, which are a bird foreign to Britain. 50 million, I'll say that again, 50 million of these birds are raised and released every year so rich morons can go and shoot them for fun. Well, they raise them on moorlands where they've chopped down all the trees because pheasants like eating new green shoots. Because they've chopped down all the forest, you no longer have the roots holding the soil together, so you've got soil erosion and flooding in low-lying areas. So if we stopped the pheasant shooting industry, replanted the forests, brought back all the wild creatures we wiped out, it would be fantastic for the environment and fantastic for tourism. There are places like Abruzzo National Park in Italy where they've done this, where they've brought back wolves, bears, lynx. Nobody has been attacked. Occasionally a sheep or a cow is taken and there's a compensation scheme. But successive governments in Britain have been too cowardly to do it, and it disgusts me.
There's one thing that I agree totally about stopping the pheasant industry. I abhor blood sports and I don't even eat meat. In fact, I hardly eat dairy products now because of the animal cruelty involved. But there is one thing that they could do that wouldn't stop the pheasant industry and would actually be useful. On Exmoor we have the Exmoor pony, which, although not truly wild, is the most primitive of the British ponies, and it is the one most adapted to living on moorland. The ponies, the semi-wild ponies in other parts of the country are far less adapted. If one was to introduce the Exmoor pony, and there are so many Exmoor ponies now they are having to be culled, if one was to reintroduce the Exmoor pony, which is the nearest to the indigenous British wild horse, the original ones, to some of these other areas where there are no wild ponies, that would make an incredible difference to the ecology. Because it's being found, have you ever read Isabella Tree's Wilding book?
No, I haven't.
Have I ever given you a copy?
No.
Okay, you know what your next birthday present's going to be, because it's an absolutely wonderful book. Lady Isabella Tree and her husband had been running the family farm for about 25 years, and it had been running on government subsidies, and they were still making a loss. So they decided they owned the land, it wasn't mortgaged, they were going to rewild it completely. But they did something different. Rather than introducing animals that should have been there, they just on the whole, they just let them go. They let it rewild itself, which is why the book is called Wilding, not Rewilding. And within a remarkably small length of time, there were beavers, there were dormice, there were, what are they called, pigeons, turtle doves, which are one of Britain's now rarest migrant birds, and there are now storks, all of which have colonised it because out of some sort of animal sixth sense they knew that this would be a decent place to go to. They didn't even, on the whole, they didn't even have to do anything themselves. They dug a few ponds, they undammed streams that streams that in Victorian times had gone underground into culverts. They dug out and made the streams work properly again. But it's an absolutely fantastic book. I recommend it. And one of the things they were talking about is how introducing hoofed mammals, and one of the things they did, because the government at the time, there were no wild boars there, they wouldn't let them introduce wild boars. I believe they're there now because they're everywhere. But they took one of the earliest breeds, one of the most ancient breeds of British domestic pig, and just let them out to live wild. And they did it with Highland cattle, which are one of the nearest creatures you can get that look like auroch. And the beneficial effect that it has had on the environment in that particular part of Sussex really has to be seen, or in my case read about, to be believed. It's an absolutely fantastic book. Richard, why do you think the government and the British establishment and organisations like English Nature, which aren't the government, but they have been, ever since Tony Blair's time, they have been sort of devolved from the government to do all the stuff involving the environment that would once have been done by the Department of the Environment? Why do you think they're all so timid about this?
Two reasons. One, they're cowed by farmers. I think they're cowed by both by farmers and by the shooting industry, which is infuriating and which they shouldn't be. And I think there are too many people in places of power that are the kind of upper class moron that just loves killing animals, possibly due to mental retardation, due to inbreeding in the English upper classes. There are too many of these chinless, buck-toothed idiots in charge.
Don't mince your words, Richard. Say it like it is. Say what you mean.
The other thing you've got to realise is that we've got a massive overpopulation of deer. Deer have to be culled. Hundreds and thousands of them have to be culled every year. If we brought back wolverines, lynx, wolves, brown bears, they would be doing it. They would be doing this, and we wouldn't have to cull the deer.
Yeah, and in the places where there are wild goats still, like the Valley of the Rocks in Linton in North Devon, or the Valley of the Goats, as that guy called this film, which I thought was a brilliant title. In places like that, they're culling the goats. And to have a few apex predators back would be a marvellous thing for the environment. And I think, to bring cryptozoology into it, I think that's the reason why the mystery cats, I think they're fairly small in number, but that's why the mystery cats in England in particular are doing so well, because there is a
niche,
abundance. Yeah, you're right, there's a niche for an apex predator, because we wiped out our apex predators centuries ago. The wolf was, I think, the last to go, about 300 years ago. The bear, about 1,000 years ago. And the lynx, depending on who you believe, was either about 1,400 years ago or 800 years ago, depending who you believe. And I have no idea when the last wolverines, indigenous wolverines, were. But I think there's nothing that introductionists do, and there's none of the reintroduction programs that I've heard of that are even slightly wrong in any way. And if the introductionist hobbyists were doing what the Acclimatization Society did in the 19th century, introducing all sorts of peculiar creatures like yaks and wallabies and things, not that they actually did any harm, but if they were introducing stupid things, that I can see would cause a problem. But they're not. And although it's probably going to be breaking the law soon, and I'm amazed that we've survived so long on this show without being busted for it and being accused of hate speech. Good on them, and long may they continue.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, says, don't forget to ring the notification bell, otherwise you'll miss the new episodes. And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
These might look like ordinary, everyday people, but they're not. Let's take a closer look. I'm filling my tomato harness with talcum powder on the moon. Back seats for keep a welcome in the hillside. Cherry ripe, I live inside of a crab with Rip Van Winkle and the Patty Cake Man. Yes, they were all wazzocks. You can tell wazzocks by their general waz-tardedness. So remember, think once, think twice, think wazzock.
That was a public information film.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is about it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I do apologise for any bits where my face and my sound were out of sync. Richard and I filmed this at the end of August, and since then I upgraded my software, my video editing software, and also Windows automatically updated its software, and it's all gone a little bit pear-shaped, and I'm having difficulty synchronizing things that are being filmed, so please bear with me. I think it's more important that the show continues rather than we take a break while I try and work out what the bloody hell the software people have done. I want to say a big thank you to Richard, who was my guest this week, and to my producer Louis, and to Graham and V, and the darling Guinevere for all the work they do behind the scenes. I'm going to be back next week, and it'll be with Richard again, and we're talking about dragons. So, are you going to be there, Mr. McCrimmon? Because if you are there, Mr. McCrimmon, I'll be there doing the live chat and the notifications and all the other things that a man has to do on a Saturday afternoon. And if you're there watching, I expect I'll be seeing you